Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on wherever you are. Most probably, I hope you are safe and well at home in these current very difficult and challenging circumstances. Welcome to our Chartered Banker International webinar on green and sustainable finance and responsible investing in partnership with our colleagues from the Asian Institute of Chartered Bankers based in Malaysia and the Financial Services Institute of Australasia. I'm Simon Thompson. I'm Chief Executive of the Chartered Banker Institute. Perhaps more relevant for this session, I'm the editor and co-author of Green and Sustainable Finance Principles and Practice and co-chair of the UK's Green Finance Education Charter. I'm joined for our discussion today by two experts and pioneers in green and sustainable finance and responsible investing, who we'll hear from in just a moment. So can I introduce Dr Angela Falconer, who's the Associate Director at the Climate Policy Initiative. She leads the London Climate Finance team, where she oversees the work of a team of analysts and advises governments and investment leaders on climate finance. So Angela's joining us from London this morning. Angela, would you like to say hello?
Good morning everyone. Glad to be part of this webinar today. Looking forward to the conversation.
Good. And from Australia, I'm delighted to welcome Senior FINSIA Fellow and Veteran Investment Professional, that was his description, not mine, Giles Gunesekera, Chief Executive of the Global Impact Initiative. So Giles has been a long-standing and very early advocate for impact investment and ESG, and his leadership in that area has been recognised by the United Nations, among many others. So, hi, good evening, Giles. Would you like to say hello?
Yeah, good evening to those in Australia and good morning to those in Europe.
Great, so welcome Angela and Giles. Welcome to everyone listening in from Australia, Malaysia, Europe, the UK and many other parts of the world. We're expecting around 500 people to join us either live or shortly afterwards. You're all very welcome. So our agenda for this morning is as follows. I'll go through some very brief introductory remarks and then ask Angela and Giles for their introductory remarks too. We'll have a discussion for around about 25 minutes, structured around Mark Carney's 3 R's, reporting, risk and return being the opportunity for green finance and responsible investing. Around about sort of 8:35, 8:40, we'll have time for questions and answers. So please use the question facility you should all have on Zoom. And I'll bring it to a close at about sort of 8:55 so that 9 a.m. UK time will be finished. Those of us in the UK, we can start our working days at home. And for those of you in other parts of the world, you'll be halfway through your days or it'll be the evening. So let me start by setting the scene before I bring in Angela and Giles. So I think whether you follow Extinction Rebellion, Greta Thunberg, David Attenborough or Mark Carney, and I follow all of them on Tinder, which creates havoc with my dating profile, wherever you are in the world right now, you'll have seen the prominence given in politics, in policy, regulation, in civil society to tackling the climate emergency. And that hasn't really changed, in my view, because of COVID-19, at least not yet. And in fact, it may accelerate in some ways because of the pandemic. I'm sure that's something we may discuss towards the end of this morning's session. You may also have seen the prominence given to the role of the finance sector, our sector, in responding to and leading the transition to a sustainable, low-carbon world. The Paris Agreement requires countries to make flows of finance consistent with low greenhouse gas emissions and climate resilient development. And I think it's very telling that the key global climate change agreement has in one of its 3 main objectives singled out the critical role of finance. That's Article 2.1c in the jargon. That transition requires very substantial capital. There's many different estimates around. One I find quite compelling is the $6 trillion required per year. It's the OECD estimate to try to limit global warming to less than 2 degrees, although currently I think that looks unachievable both in terms of the warming target and the finance target. I think the good news is that, and we do need some good news at the current time, is that we have developed most, if not all, of the technologies we need for a sustainable low carbon world. Renewable energy, clean transport, energy efficient buildings, sustainable agriculture, aquaculture and forestry, carbon capture and storage solutions, although some of these still need to be successfully scaled up and industrialized, but we pretty much have the technology we need. We're also developing more resilient infrastructure to support communities more impacted by the effects of climate change, improving their resilience to rising sea levels or extreme weather events, for example. But the scale of investment required, that $6 trillion a year, means that public funds alone will not be sufficient, and there are clearly going to be many other calls on public funds, certainly in the short and medium term now. So our sector, our banking and finance profession, therefore, has a key role, perhaps the key role, I would argue the key role, in mobilizing and directing private capital to support that transition, because some 80% of funds are estimated to come, that they'll need to come from private sources. And it is our sector, banks, investment funds, insurers, other financial institutions, that by doing what we do best can connect private capital and savings with the investments and projects needed for the transition to a sustainable, low-carbon world. As Mark Carney pointed out in his recent speech to launch the pathway to COP26 in Glasgow in November this year, which we hope will still go ahead, there are very substantial opportunities for the financial sector from climate change. So opportunity return, he would call it, one of the 3 R's, alongside the need for reporting and disclosure and a better understanding of climate risks. And it's those 3 R's, reporting, risk and return, but particularly probably risk and return, we'll try to cover in our webinar today. So there's a great deal for all financial services firms and practitioners to think about and act on in the green and sustainable finance space, as well as I think a great deal for us to discuss during our webinar. My role now as chair is to step back to make sure we cover as much as possible, and I want to give Angela and Giles, who are the real experts here, a chance to share their thoughts, and all of you a chance to ask the many questions that I hope and I'm sure you'll have for them. So let me ask both Angela and Giles, but Angela, starting with you first, what does green and sustainable finance mean for you? Where are the immediate and longer term opportunities and challenges you think, you believe that we, the financial services sector, should be focusing on?
Thank you very much, Simon. So good morning, good evening, everyone. Just to say a little bit about my organisation, First Climate Policy Initiative, and what green finance means to us. We are focused on the climate aspects, but increasingly the interlinkages with sustainable development more broadly. Climate Policy Initiative is an analysis and advisory organisation that works with governments, financial institutions and businesses across the world to drive economic growth whilst addressing climate change. We're particularly focused on climate finance issues, working a lot with development finance institutions, but also commercial increasingly, and focused on the developing world and economies. Our latest analysis on the global landscape of climate finance has highlighted the urgent needs for private finance in particular to drive sustainable development. In 2017-2018, our numbers show an annual average of $579 billion being invested into climate mitigation and adaptation projects around the world. So we're looking at primary investment in physical assets here. But we'll discuss today, you know, the interlinkages upstream with the broader financial systems and the challenges around reporting, measuring risk, and looking for opportunities there up the value chain of the financial system. We've been seeing big increases over the past years in the amount of climate finance that is flowing, but as Simon mentioned, it's far below what we think is needed to stave off a climate catastrophe, really. To maintain warming below 1.5 degrees, the fact is we need trillions, not billions of investment. Figures are in the region of 3.8 or up to 6 trillion per year needed for transitions of all sectors. And through our tracking of climate finance, though, we are able to see that commercial financial institutions are starting to play a more prominent role. In our numbers, we see 1/5 of private climate finance being delivered by commercial banks, for about 73 billion annually in 2017-2018, and that increased 50% from the previous reporting years. That was really concentrated on renewable energy though, 93% of the investment. And we need to look at the flip side, the elephant in the room. Major banks' average annual lending to fossil fuel expansion, new reserves, infrastructure and power in 2017 and 18, the same years, was estimated at 178 billion by Bank Track, and about 650 billion in loans more broadly to fossil fuel companies. So we really need to see how we can divest and diversify away from those high carbon industries. So we can see that commercial lenders do have a major challenge to shift and align their financing activities with decarbonisation pathways under the under the Paris Agreement. Part of that Paris Agreement is about greening the whole financial system, Article 2.1c, which I think we'll talk about more. I think that's really interesting because it comes beyond direct project financing to how banks can get involved in influencing the cost of capital, the availability of capital for green businesses and developers, and doing what they do best. And those types of businesses are maybe not initially so obviously green businesses, so identifying and defining what kinds of organizations and industries are part of the transition of different sectors is part of what we need to be doing. We also believe that innovative climate finance solutions are a way to de-risk and attract private investment at scale. We've been running a lab, Global Innovation Lab for Climate Finance for the past 5 years, which involves a number of public and private financial institutions, developers, commercial banks and philanthropies, looking at solutions to drive billions of private investment into climate mitigation and adaptation solutions. And I'm hoping to share a few of those examples also beyond the energy sector to show where we might be able to drive investment to unlock new opportunities. So I'll pause there and hand back to Simon.
Great, thank you, Angela. That's a great overview and sets us up well. In fact, when you talked about some of the examples, we really got a question from John about risk and new technologies. So don't answer that just now. We'll hold it, but I think that will pick up on the or you'll be able to weave that into talking about some of the things that the lab does. But before we do that, Giles, could I bring you in now? So what does green and sustainable finance sort of mean for you, and from your perspective, on the investment side, sort of where are the immediate and the longer term opportunities and challenges, and where do you think our focus needs to be as a finance sector and a finance profession?
Yeah, thanks, Simon. And again, good morning and good evening to those on the call. Just by way of background, our organisation, Global Impact Initiative, creates impact investments. So that's investments that have the dual purpose of both financial return and social impact. So everything we do has to have a positive financial return, and there has to be intentionality around the social impact that we're creating. We have 5 key pillars that we work under. Gender equality, Indigenous communities, health, affordable housing and climate. Obviously the climate piece is the most relevant for the discussion today, but in actual fact gender equality and gender specifically cuts across all those 5 pillars, in that we truly believe, as does the research show, that engagement of women and girls at all ends, from education, employment, and training, really has the greatest opportunity to change the world. And when you combine that with climate, it really is some massive opportunities. So where we're seeing opportunity, Simon, is really in a number of ways. We deal with a lot of institutional investors, pension funds in Europe and superannuation funds here in Australia. There are, as a fund manager, you will not get the opportunity to talk to those funds or to put a proposal forward, an RFP, unless you have an ESG framework as part of your investment mandate. As an organisation, we engage with fund managers. We help them in their ESG frameworks. We help them with impact investing, but we also launch funds ourselves, which will be managed by fund managers. But we, as a business, have made the decision that none of our portfolios, or none of the portfolios that we engage fund managers for, will ever have any alcohol, gaming, tobacco, weapons, fossil fuels, and adult entertainment exposure. So we've made that ESG, that responsible investment decision right up front. And then from there, we can go into any of those thematic areas, whether it be around climate, gender, affordable housing, etc. But really, sustainable, responsible investing is the bedrock. And that's the way that it seems to be moving for a lot of institutional clients. If we take a quick kind of step around the world, the US is very much, the impact responsible investment space is driven by family offices and foundations. In Europe, it's been driven very much by pension funds. In Australasia, so in Australia and Asia, it's still a bit of a mixture. There hasn't been there's been a few moves in Australia, some local superannuation funds who've done a great job around impact and around climate. And in Asia, it's becoming even more important. And we're seeing a bit of a move, probably more from families than from institutions, mainly because you've got very wealthy families that have made a lot of money from either digging up the ground or building buildings, and really emitting a lot of carbon, that are now saying, okay, we need to do something about the environment. We need to do something about the communities that we're operating in. And this is a great way to do it. So we can get into some further examples, I guess, a little bit later, Simon, but I thought that might be a good starting point in terms of background and what we're seeing amongst global investors.
Great, thank you, thank you, Giles. And if I could pick up on sort of one of the latter points you made there, you talked about individuals or families or businesses that have perhaps sort of made money from extractive industries, from digging up the ground, as you said, are now thinking about perhaps how can they transition their businesses. And this links to, so one of the questions John has asked is, how do we move a discussion about this from emotional analysis, which I guess is what you're driving at there, to financial analysis. And this probably comes back, Angela, to a point you made in your remarks about how we can influence financial institutions' behaviour, and particularly the cost of capital. Because if you want to change banks' behaviour, one of the biggest levers you have is to influence the cost of capital, either in a positive or negative direction. So a question for both of you. Maybe Giles, if you wanted to go first, as it links to your final remarks. And so, how do we sort of, firstly, how do we shift from emotional to rational financial analysis of the risk and the return on climate, but broader sustainability factors, and how far do you think we are down that curve at the moment? Yeah,
I'll answer that, Simon, in the way of an anecdote or a story. I presented at a couple of nearly 2 years ago now at Fund Forum International in Berlin, which is the biggest. Those of you on the call may have been to it, certainly heard of it. It's the biggest gathering of institutional investors in the world. There's about 3,000 attendees at this conference, and I was speaking very broadly about renewable energy, about some of our plans around bringing to market a renewable energy fund, and was literally bowled over by pension funds, investors, but mainly institutional investors, that basically gave me their card and said, the commonality amongst it, and I'll paraphrase, but the commonality was, Giles, we know you've got land, we know you've got sun in Australia, so why wouldn't we be investing in renewable energy in a place like Australia? Sadly, that's that's very well known in Europe and outside Australia. But sadly, and we'll get to this later, the government of Australia hasn't quite realised that as yet. But things are definitely changing. And really, how you take emotion out of it is institutional investors, family offices, private banks. They want investments that make money. And then if you can build in social impact, which obviously as a firm we are, but in essence green finance does, that really does start to tick many more boxes. And as I mentioned, our work is all around intentionally creating that social impact. So when we're creating a climate fund, we're not only saying, yes, you will get, X, rate of return, which, for our particular climate fund that we're putting together, it'll be somewhere between kind of 10 to 12% return. But you are also creating employment opportunities for women. You're creating apprenticeships. You are helping the health system, you're helping the education system. So they're all the social, that's all the, as well as obviously measuring the carbon footprint, et cetera, or the reduction of, but they're all the additionality, but more importantly, the intentional social impact that we bring into the mix. And the history has shown, particularly in the impact space and the responsible investing space, people will always ask that question, what's the return? Is it comparable? Am I going to go backwards? Et cetera, et cetera. But after a while, they forget about the returns and actually are much more focused on the social impact. But actually in the climate space, and I'm sure Angela will go into this in a bit more detail as well, in the climate space, there's a lot of money to be made. So I think this is definitely less of an issue around returns when it comes to climate, because things like solar energy, batteries, wind, wave, climate technologies, which involves things like vertical farming, carbon capture, biomass. They all make money, and will do for the foreseeable future.
So, thanks, Giles. So Angela, I mean, this is the CPI has been working in this area for many years now. Have you and your colleagues seen a significant shift from what was a few years ago, perhaps smaller numbers of sort of well-intentioned, socially purposeful individuals in the finance sector, kind of wanting to do this for moral and environmental reasons? Are you now having discussions that are far more around the financial analysis side, either on the risk and return ends of that spectrum?
Yeah, I mean, from day one as an organisation, we've been around for 10 years. We recognise that in working with governments in emerging economies, that the only way to affect change would be through the growth lens, and supporting development and commercial returns, together with governments and with financial institutions. So we've always had that approach, and indeed in our Global Innovation Lab, we're looking for solutions that are innovative, that are supporting new technologies and existing proven technologies for climate mitigation and adaptation. But a key area is looking for the financial return for financial sustainability, because we know practically these things cannot survive without that. And there's very limited public or philanthropic finance available that's not sufficient to drive the change that we need to see. But I think, moving away from the emotional to move beyond that, I think it's really highlighting the evidence, the opportunities that exist. As Giles says, there are so many. So maybe just to give an example as well, which is not on the climate mitigation side, but on the adaptation side, which we need to bear in mind, because at the moment, policies and measures that we have in place have us on track for a 3.7 degree warming world. So there is going to be some amount of warming that we need to adjust to. We've been working with an equity fund called Lightsmith, which is developing a fund that blends commercial and concessional finance to support companies which are developing climate intelligence products and resilience solutions. So these might be the vertical farming companies, logistics companies that optimize agriculture supply chains and logistics to reduce emissions, smart seed companies that are adjusted to a warming climate. And that fund is targeting a 25% return. So really very commercial, and they have about 900 companies in the pipeline that they're working with to support through this blended finance fund. So there are real opportunities out there, and lots of solution providers, small and large businesses that are developing interesting solutions to be supported.
Thanks, and I would add as well from thanks, Angela, Giles, you both focused on the return side there. I think in terms of the financial argument as well, we do need to look at it from a risk perspective as well. I think many will probably be aware that in January this year, the World Economic Forum, which releases the big global risks report, sort of ranked climate change and specifically the risk of failing to take the necessary action on climate change as the key risks faced by business, finance, society over the next decade. Whether they would now wish to revisit that or not would be an interesting question for them, but it's certainly still up there as a medium long-term risk. Also at the start of the year, was quite well reported, you had BlackRock and their chief executive writing to clients that climate change presented a substantial systemic risk, not just to his own firm, but to financial markets overall, and that they therefore they would take action to compel greater disclosure from all the firms they were investing in and involved with, in line with the TCFD, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure recommendations. For me, one of the biggest financial arguments is you've got the Bank of England, the Mark Carney, estimating that as much as $20 trillion of assets could be stranded by climate change over the next decade. And I think the fact that you have central banks and financial regulators identifying this as one of the top systemic financial risks, and therefore certainly in the UK, and I know it's starting to be rolled out around the world, we're beginning to include climate risks as a substantial part of financial institution stress tests. Those may be paused now because of current events, but they'll certainly come back. Putting specific responsibilities on financial executives for identifying, disclosing climate risk. These are not emotional responses. The Bank of England is a fantastic institution, but they're not emotional. They're very rational about these things. That's why they're good at what they do, and they see this as being a major risk, and therefore they would want to shift behaviour. We're seeing that in the UK. We're seeing it in Europe as well through the European Union's Sustainable Finance Action Plan. The taxonomy has been published. We've got a new European Green Deal. There's talk, although it's only talk at the moment, about green supporting factors for capital. There was capital relief for green lending and investment in the EU. All these things are not emotional; they're financial, and they can really shift bank behaviour, I think. Just on the risk side of things, we've had a question from Kenneth who asks, is it a good start for banks to, and I guess we could broaden this to financial institutions as a whole, is it a good start for institutions to set risk appetite on exposure to firms or sectors that could have a negative impact on the climate and environment? I think, to me, the answer would be yes, but maybe we could go into that in a bit more detail. Sort of, Angela or Giles, how would you advise a financial institution to think about risk appetite? Maybe Angela, if you wanted to think about climate in particular, and Giles, maybe you would like to think about some of the broader sustainability aspects.
Yeah, I'd be happy to answer that, and also look back to the previous question around fossil fuel companies that are investing in renewable assets as well, to say I think it's not straightforward. It is complex, and what we need to look at are the transitions that need to happen in individual countries and different sectors. You know, the transition scenarios of the IEA, of IPCC and others do see elements of fossil fuel generation that will have to remain over the next 20 years as part of the transition and phase out. Certainly, there has to be a dramatic reduction. Understanding which economic activities are part of that transition for different sectors is something that I think a lot of organizations and financial institutions are involved in looking at the moment, including ourselves. So we want to understand of that $500 billion that's being invested now, what is the actual emissions impact? How do we benchmark that, and what's being done in different sectors against the needs to peak emissions and reduce over the next 10 to 20 years. So I think the work that the EU taxonomy and sort of parallel activities in China and elsewhere are really important in starting that discussion of, you know, the positive list, the transition list. And I think then the work of banks and financial institutions to really understand their portfolios at the same time. And there's lots of emerging tools like PACTA of 2 Degrees Investing, for example, that are helping financial institutions to understand what kind of warming scenario your financial institution is aligned with. So not straightforward, but I think there's a lot of good work being done with lots of different organizations. And as an organization ourselves, we're trying to see how we can help to convene and bring together a lot of those sort of fragmented analytical activities that are happening to move faster and understanding what kinds of businesses and activities are part of the transition and others that don't play any part in the transition.
Thanks. And it does seem that there has been a lot of work, you say, over the past few years on the climate side, and there's ever increasing data, both on the sort of environmental impact and on then the financial impact, and we have the TCFD recommendations to provide structure around these things. So we are starting to be able to capture and to discuss risk appetite for banks in at least on climate in a relatively quantitative manner that financial institutions are familiar with. But Giles, I think this is a lot tougher on the broader sustainability side, isn't it? So have you got any kind of hints and tips? How can financial institutions kind of sort of assess sort of risk and impact in some of the other sustainability areas that you're particularly interested and involved in?
Yeah, a lot of the work that we do, Simon, is, you know, when we're talking to clients around, particularly around impact investing and around sustainability, ensuring that whatever they're doing is aligned with their mission, vision and values. And to give an example, you know, one of the organisations that we worked with recently, you know, they spoke a lot about, you know, about their need and their desire to be working with Indigenous communities, as an example, but it wasn't. You know, it was there in the mission and vision statement, but it wasn't actually being translated into action. So we, you know, were helping them around that. You know, okay, so here are some things that you can do to get more engaged with the Indigenous community. You know, look at your suppliers, look at your employees. You know, look at a whole range of, do a full 360 analysis to ascertain, you know, where you can engage more. And really the biggest engagement piece that we're seeing, and the most powerful, effective engagement piece is, well, there's two. One is customers, because organisations tend to listen to customers, particularly if a lot of them are jumping up and down about the same topic at the same time, which is very much happening at the moment. And the other big influence is employees. You know, in our work with corporates, we know for a fact that organisations are getting many more questions in the interview process about What do they do around recycling? Are they assessing the human rights impact of their suppliers and making sure there's no child labour in the supply chain? Are they, effectively, recycling? Do they have solar panels on the roof? And if not, why not? So lots of questions around sustainability comes through that, as well as voluntary, as well as philanthropy, time off for volunteering. So we have this whole generation of employees that are coming through that are basically saying, if I'm going to work for you, if I'm going to work for you, you need to be doing the right thing, and if not, I've got a choice. Now, in a post-coronavirus world, that will become a little bit tougher because obviously there'll be potentially less jobs around initially, but once the economies improve, and this will be a global improvement, those opportunities will certainly avail themselves. And we only need to look at, examples. And you mentioned BlackRock before, Simon. I mean, BlackRock, the biggest fund manager in the world, established an impact investment business because of a handful of graduates who basically, cornered Larry Fink and said, why aren't we thinking about impact investing? Why aren't we doing things more sustainably? Now, that's an organisation that can do a lot more, but at least they've started. And to those of you out there that are working for big corporates or even small corporates, it's the little things to think about right now, which eventually, will grow into really big initiatives. So we're actually, and if I can just also pick up, Simon, on an earlier point you made, you did a really good analysis of some of the initiatives that have been happening globally. About 6 months ago, I'm on a UN advisory board for climate change, and the UN actually changed that to climate and health, which I think is is incredible forecasting from the UN, but it really encapsulates exactly what we're going through now. This is a health crisis which is going to affect the climate, and in Australia we've seen a climate crisis which has affected health, and our climate crisis came a few months ago in the form of pretty extensive bushfires, which impacted on health, both financial as well as physical. And now the whole world's seeing the reverse, in that health is impacting the economy, which is actually having a positive impact on the environment, because there's less planes and cars traveling around. But ultimately, they're all connected, and that's what we're living in. And this is, if there's one good thing that comes out of this particular crisis, is that we fully recognise that we are truly in a connected world, and climate and health has a big impact on everything.
That's a great point, and one I would thoroughly endorse. I hadn't heard about that change to climate and health, but as you say, a fantastic piece of forecasting. If only we'd listened 6 months ago, we might be in a different world now. But we're not, sadly. But one of the things we can do, picking up on your point there, Giles, is as individuals we can all act as agents of change. Some of us will be able to do it on a bigger scale perhaps than others, depending on who we work for, where we work with that organisation, how well we're networked, and so on. But there is certainly an individual, individuals can create change. In fact, it's the only thing that does create change. The system doesn't change by itself, it's individuals that create change. And actually there's kind of two questions that sort of relate to this. Sort of Amelia's sort of asked about what actions can those in the financial sector take to help influence change from customers, and Graham been asked a slightly different question, but it really comes down to, again, what can banks and bankers do to help influence SME businesses and so on, change their sort of economic behaviour and impact on the environment and society more broadly. So have you seen examples of successful sort of financial products and solutions, or emerging products and solutions, or emerging ideas that can help shift that sort of individual consumer behaviour or company behaviour, either on the banking side or the investment side? Because I do think it's by again, doing one of the things we do really well as a financial services sector, developing innovative products and services, that can produce a return for the institution. But if we can nudge and shape behaviour through that to the in the areas we want to, then we all benefit from that. So who would either like to go first on that one?
Yeah, I'd like to come in, Simon, and maybe share a couple of examples from our innovation lab that are sort of concretely driving investment and receiving commercial investment for climate mitigation projects. And I think then the sort of question higher up is, you know, how can banks stimulate that kind of activity of driving and developing green businesses, because we see a lot of great ideas and new technologies coming forward from entrepreneurs, from technology developers, but they really struggle to receive the first set of seed financing to get off the ground. So I think when banks can provide pools of capital or credit lines from sort of public financial institutions to banks to provide pots of capital for these kinds of new solutions that can really drive change much more quickly. But only a couple of the 41 instruments that we've developed through the lab have attracted commercial financial investment from commercial financial institutions, from banks specifically. One of those has been something called Affordable Green Homes, which was developed by a Southern Africa housing developer, IHS Housing Solutions. It's delivering and building demand for green homes in sub-Saharan Africa by measuring the benefits that are provided to investors, lowering the overall cost of capital available to enable the housing developer to invest in clean technologies to green homes without having to see lower returns to the commercial investors. So they're integrating a bit of concessional capital to be able to do that initially and really measure and demonstrate the benefits and the returns to investors. Another example is something called Proterra, which some of you may have heard of. They're a zero-emission heavy-duty electric vehicle manufacturer based in the US. They've been developing a lease financing model to support the upfront costs of electric buses and particularly leasing the batteries to make them price competitive with fossil fuel powered buses. And Mitsui came in with a $200 million credit facility to support the battery lease program last year to allow them to expand. So I think these are some interesting solutions beyond renewables, where we can see the proven commercial return model, but looking to other sectors like transport, like infrastructure and housing, where there are some interesting solutions being developed.
And Angela, you could, I thought that was interesting. You mentioned kind of only two of the kind of the lab's technologies had been successfully sort of financed. I think this kind of speaks to John's question around new technologies may come with may have potentially high returns, but there's also much higher risk, and we do seem to have a gap in our finance sector at the moment between whether it's kind of some policy-driven funding or venture capital or even angel investor funding, but then actually scaling up. And certainly in the UK, that's a big issue for us. I understand it's an issue in most parts of the world. So is there anything you think can and should be done?
Can I correct just a second, Simon, to say that of our 41 instruments, there has been $2 billion raised, $2 billion US dollars of investments into those. Only 2 have received bank financing, commercial bank financing. The others have received development bank financing, institutional investors, and a broader range of philanthropy, donors, etc. but many are testing new technologies or innovations where initially we see some development capital will be needed. And then hopefully when it's a proven model with the commercial return, then at those stages we think that the more commercial investors will start to come in.
But do you think commercial banks perhaps lack the knowledge and skills to be able to assess the new technologies that are being developed? I mean, is it less a gap of capital and funding and more a gap of knowledge and skill? And if we can fill that gap, then perhaps it's more likely that commercial banks can come in at a slightly earlier stage. But it won't be their role to come in at early stage in all investments, clearly. But we're not talking about very small businesses here. We're talking about quite substantial sector-changing ideas and initiatives, aren't we?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think where banks are coming in now with renewable generation projects, that learning has happened. It is sort of simpler, concentrated assets to finance. It's more complicated when you're looking at fleets of electric buses, all of the different counterparties that are involved, for example, or even beyond in sort of natural infrastructure, restoration of common goods like mangroves that protect coastal assets and things like that. So yeah, I think there's a huge sort of upskilling to understand the opportunities that exist, but a lot of opportunity in financial structuring as well to protect commercial investors that come in together with other players that play their role in taking on the first loss and different risks within more innovative projects.
And Giles, again, have you come across some good examples of some good examples or good ideas for financial products and services that can encourage whether it's retail investors or institutional investors to support more sustainable consumption and behaviours and investment?
Yeah, look, there's lots of research that's been done on the returns of responsible investments versus traditional investments. It's very conclusive that responsible, sustainable investments perform as well, if not better, than traditional investments. Angela picked up a really good point around effectively around the ecosystem working better together and having more participants around the table. We've already mentioned organisations like the UN, but obviously government has a role to play. And here in Australia, the New South Wales government recently launched their own green bond to finance a number of renewable energy projects. It was $1 billion. It was oversubscribed. I think it was closer to about $2 billion in the end. So obviously, there was a lot of demand for that. We had recently the Tasmanian government that made commitments to go for 200% of their renewable energy target, not 100%. So basically to generate more than what is required for their, for their economy, for their state. It's very well known, certainly for those in Australia, but probably globally, that Elon Musk was, or someone bet Elon Musk that he couldn't put up a battery facility in South Australia to help them with their renewable energy projects, with their power issues, I should say, in 30 days, and he did it within 30 days, and that's now providing a lot of, I think it's something like 70 to 80% of South Australia's renewable energy. So even in the absence of firm, positive federal government policy in Australia, there's lots of states, Tasmania, South Australia and Queensland and also New South Wales, that are doing some really positive things around renewable energy, but also their governments are doing positive things to support investment into renewable energy and into that infrastructure. There was initially a bit of land grabbing around, particularly around solar assets. A lot of people overgearing themselves, to buy solar assets. That's now come back to a bit more of normality. So yeah, there's examples of government, examples of sustainable products, examples of responsible investing that are well and truly out there. And, you know, if your financial advisor's not finding them for you, or you can't find them, well, certainly if your financial advisor's not finding them, they're not looking hard enough, because they're there and there's lots of examples, and it will only continue. And maybe if I can just quickly, Simon, there's a question from Bettina Pidcock, which goes, really to this question that we were talking about too, around engagement and around what people can do. And Bettina asks, how can the financial services sector play a role in reducing the power of extractive industries in the political process, which is a big issue globally? Really, quite simply, just stop lending to extractive industries. There are many more options that banks have. They don't have to lend to extractive industries, but it's their call at the moment, and it's really up to customers, as we're seeing all over the world, as well as employees, to say, to basically help financial services and particularly banks stop doing that. And another quick anecdote, we've got some doing some work with energy companies, particularly oil and gas companies, who are trying to get away from but basically just reinvent themselves as renewable energy companies, as infrastructure companies. These are companies that have recognised that, yes, they can't keep digging up the ground, and they can't. They've got to do things more sustainably, and they want to be ready to basically be an input to the grid. And that input for them will be through renewable and through more sustainable sources, and then trading the advantages, of that as well. So, there's lots of really good things happening, and it's from players that you wouldn't imagine are involved in this space, but are definitely looking at how do they make some changes. You're on mute, Simon.
We still can't hear you, Simon.
You should be able to hear me now. So apologies for that. Yeah, we've Rachel in the background, and I've been unmuting and muting myself at the same time. So obviously I've said too much, and I should shut up clearly. What I did want to say was there are lots of, I think, really good examples of how what I see from the banking side about how banks and sort of payments firms are trying to promote more sustainable behaviour. The poster child is ant forest in China. Don't know if there's anybody on the call who uses that. So Shireen, this sort of comes to your question about what are some of the banks in Asia Pacific are doing in this area. So have a look at Alipay's Ant Forest, which is a payment app which promotes more sustainable consumption choices. They've had somewhere in the region of several 100 million users, and a great example of using gamification and sort of nudge technologies to get people to take public transport, to reduce paper use, just small things individuals can do. It then leads to planting of trees on quite a large scale in Western China. I think sort of more than 100 million trees have been planted over the past few years. Another quick example, Nordea Bank in Scandinavia has a carbon tracker wallet. So as you, if you opt into this, as you are engaging in your normal economic behavior, as you buy things, it will tell you the impact of those purchases, and I believe it can also sort of suggest lower carbon alternatives. We're now starting to see on the insurance side some more green insurance linked to energy efficiency in homes, and certainly in the UK and other countries we're starting to see the rollout of green mortgages. And in the EU at least, the green mortgage is priced slightly below the equivalent of a vanilla mortgage equivalent, and that's based on the idea that an energy efficient home will reduce credit default risk, because simply individuals will have more cash available to repay mortgages. So the issue, though, none of these, with the exception perhaps of Mount Forest, are anywhere near the kind of scale we need. So that's certainly something on the retail side. I'm conscious we're coming to the end of our allotted hour. I'm really glad, so one of the questions I wanted to finish on, I'm really glad someone's asked this. It's an anonymous viewer. That's fine, you don't have to tell us who you are. But they're saying, they say the UN's Inga Anderson says COVID-19 is a warning about the seriousness of the climate crisis. David Attenborough talked in an interview that climate is still a bigger issue. So, so are they right? Or perhaps we should ask, if I can just maybe gloss on that question a little bit. Do you feel that the current COVID-19 issue is likely to accelerate climate finance and sustainable finance more broadly? So that climate and health link that Giles talked to earlier. Or will the sheer scale of some of the short and medium term challenges we face mean that actually climate will take a bit of a back seat? Giles, can I maybe come to you first, then Angela, I'll come to you after that.
Yeah, for sure, Simon. Look, the corona crisis is clearly an issue, but it will go away. Whether it goes away through vaccinations or just the world, just dealing with the virus in a lot different way. But I think what the corona crisis is revealing to a lot of people is there's a lot of similarities with climate. This is the fact that people are getting locked in into their homes, not able to travel, not able to holiday, not able to go to cafes and restaurants and public places. This is all what could be happening if we continue on the way that we're continuing with the climate. And in fact, if we don't reverse what's happened to the climate as well. There's some amazing technology out there, particularly carbon capture technology that, if scaled, will be phenomenal in terms of actually sucking the carbon out of the air and using it for energy purposes or for building purposes. So this technology is already around. It's got a great opportunity to reverse, but combining it with other renewable energy will certainly be very helpful. So this is an interesting little window into our world if we don't do anything about climate, because not only will we locked in and have shortages or perceived shortages, et cetera, we will have increased temperatures, and we will have rising sea levels and all those other environmental factors that go with it. So look, I'm really positive. The technology's there, the willingness to change, I think will definitely increase post this crisis, but it's definitely not going to do it immediately. There is just way too much. People are naturally worried about their health, worried about their jobs, worried about the economy. So while people are very focused on those aspects, and rightly so, there's not going to be a lot of movement on climate, but I think as we come out of this, it will be very, very positive. And totally agree with David Attenborough. This is climate is a big issue, and as I said, along with gender, needs to be tackled. Gender equality or gender inequality needs to be tackled together.
Okay, so Angela, what about yourself? You an optimist or a realist, shall we say?
Well, I'm Scottish, Simon, so I would go with the realist approach, I guess. But I mean, just on a side point, I think, the alarm bell that we've been ringing about the climate crisis, with a 10 to 20 or 30 year horizon, it's so interesting now to see what's happening when a crisis like COVID is brought, fast forwarded to the present day and brought into all of our own homes and now affecting all of our own lives. So I think the parallels are interesting. The reality of what will happen, I think the economic impact is going to be unprecedented. And it's quite uncertain what impact that will have on pots of funding available for sustainable development. There are, the commercial technologies that will continue to be supported, but will this economic crisis that will follow the health crisis impact on the concessional capital that's available to support research, development, deployment of the next phase of new technologies? So that would be a concern of ours. But I think also as the sort of 2008 economic crisis emerged with green stimulus packages afterwards, we should be thinking about what kind of future we want to rebuild and how we can integrate sustainable development into the investments that pull us out of the economic crisis that will ensue. And I think on a positive note, we've all seen how we can work at home as well, many of us. So a lot of the knowledge-based economy, we're seeing how we can reduce our impact, our own carbon footprint as well. So I think we'll see perhaps some changes developing in how we work and how we use space as well, urban centres, and there's a lot of opportunity there to reduce emissions, I think.
Great. Well, thank you both. I'm afraid we've come to the end of our time, but it is good to end on a note of optimism as well. We think, as we've covered during the webinar, we face immense short-term challenges, but actually the longer-term challenge of climate is actually much bigger, but also has a much more positive, or can have a very positive outcome for society and for financial services as well, if we get it right. I think one of the key points we raised and discussed was the role of all of us as individuals in all of this. We can all change the financial services sector. We can all change society if we want to. And there's a few hundred people on this call. We could all spread this, and I say this quite deliberately. We can all spread the message of sort of positive climate and positive sustainable action like a virus. And that's for us to do. We need to get this message out to as many people in the finance sector, so that we can develop the products and services and the investments we need for retail customers, for business customers, for institutional investors, and so on. That's down to all of us. Change can happen with individuals. We do have more time as individuals to reflect on this, probably over the next few days and weeks as we stay at home. Certainly ourselves at the Chartered Banker Institute and our colleagues at the ICB in Malaysia and in Australasia with FINSIA, this is something we're all committed to, is building a community of finance professionals who understand the importance of social purpose and sustainability. So you'll be seeing a lot more from us on the education side, whether that's qualifications such as the Green Finance Certificate, or whether it's further webinars and CPD materials. Please stay in touch. Please stay involved. Thanks for your interest in this important area, and I look forward to either seeing you, hearing you on other webinars like this, and hopefully at some point in the future being able to see many of you in person too. So have a good rest of the day wherever you are. Stay safe, stay well, and yes, let's make the world a better place in so many ways. Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks, Simon. Thanks, Andrew.